or we call them funiculi, which are subdivided into tracts, or we call them fasciculi or pathways, which consist of your ascending and descending axons. So in the picture, you will see in the white matter, and remember, the white matter is white because of the axons having a myelination, right? That sheath covering makes it look white. Gray matter is just the cell body. It does not have those myelination in there. So in the white matter area, you'll see that there are these tracts. These tracts go into ascending and descending tracts. Ascending means from the spinal cord, they're going up to the brain, places medulla oblongata and those places. And coming back down would mean that's the descending tract. So you do have those tracts, and they're colored blue and pink in your textbook with arrows showing which way the arrows are going in there. You have the gray matter. You'll see that I was saying it looks like a butterfly. You'll see it's got this thinner segment on top. We call that the posterior dorsal horn. And then in the middle, another bulged area there, we call that the lateral horn. And at the bottom, we have what we call the anterior horn. These three horns in your gray matter also have different nerves entering in there, neurons. Basically, posterior horn has all your sensory neurons, so that's why from there, if the rootlets are coming out, that side of the gray matter will have what we call all sensory neurons. From your anterior horn at the bottom, which is more rounded, the anterior horn is for your motor neurons. It's like mostly somatic nervous system things go from your anterior horn. Motor neurons remember, they're multipolar kind of neurons, and you find those from your anterior horn in the gray matter. In between anterior and posterior, you have your lateral horns. The lateral horns are for autonomic nervous system. We actually have a whole chapter dedicated to autonomic nervous system that talks about how you control blood pressure and all those things within the system. So we'll look at that later. But remember those three horns and three neurons, basically, three types of functions they have over there. You'll also see that the cross-section of the spinal cord, you'll see there's a right side and a left side. Both sides have a dorsal and a ventral root. The dorsal root carries all the axons of, axons and cell body of your sensory neurons. Remember, sensory neurons are unipolar, right? Some bipolar too, but you have this unipolar neurons coming out from your gray area into this, what we call the posterior horn forming rootlets. From the rootlets, they make a dorsal root, which has an area. The area is kind of bulged up a little bit more bigger. That area we call the dorsal root ganglion. The ganglion is a place where you have all the cell bodies there. So imagine if you have sensory neurons, which is unipolar, and the axon part goes long, so it's thinner, and the cell body part, which has the nucleus and all kinds of things, is bigger. So that's why you have ganglion. We form a dorsal root ganglion. You do not see a ganglion on your ventral root. See how motor neurons are multipolar, so they just come out and go to their place. There is no ganglion within that area in there. The gray matter is divided into all those horns, so for the quiz when you are studying for it, look at those different names again, the horns and the functions and what they do. Then you have figure 11.4, that's on page 301. it's a figure on the relationship of sensory and motor neurons to the spinal cord. You'll see the simplest way sensory and motor neurons work. Basically a reflex. When you have any kind of reflex within the system, that's how it works. You'll have a sensory neuron that's colored green in your textbook. A sensory neuron comes in through the dorsal root, right? It's a unipolar neuron, comes in through the dorsal root. Within the gray matter area, it synapses with another neuron called the interneuron. The interneuron is connecting a sensory neuron with a motor neuron. So the sensory neuron comes in, connects with the interneuron. Remember, it's bringing in action potentials, right? So action potentials travel in from there, passes through the interneuron to motor neuron. The motor neuron is again in the ventral root part of it. So it's in the ventral roots and it's in the anterior horn of the gray matter. So that action potential is carried from the ventral root all the way through the nerves to wherever it's taking it. Usually in this case, it's going to take it to a muscle type. It will tell the muscle to either contract or relax. So that's a somatic motor neuron. The other pathway it can go through is straight from sensory neuron. It can synapse in the lateral horn of your gray matter, where you have another autonomic motor neuron taking that action potential into like a blood vessel, telling the blood vessel to constrict or dilate. That would be an autonomic function. So that picture shows you the basic way how your nervous system works on reflexes within your motor neurons, autonomic, somatic, both, and sensory. So from here, what you got to remember is the dorsal root contains your sensory axons and the ventral root contains your motor axons, somatic as well as autonomic. So spinal nerves have both your sensory and motor axons. That's why the nerve, when we say that this is a nerve, it doesn't mean it's an axon of a neuron. It's a couple of them. It's bundled up. A nerve means lots of axons coming in. It can be somatic, motor neuron. It can be another one of those sensory neurons. It's all bundled up. And that nerve goes into wherever, the effector organ in this case. Then we go into looking at reflexes. That's on page 302. We define reflex as we say it's stereotypic, unconscious, involuntary response to a stimuli. Stereotypic because no matter what kind of stimuli that would be, it's stereotypic. It's with stereotype it. That means the reflex would either be there or not. That's the stereotype, and that's usually how a reflex works. You poke me here, I'll do that. It's a reflex when you withdraw like that. So that's why we say it's stereotypic. Unconscious means you are never thinking about a reflex. We don't actually have time to think about reflexes. So if there is a fire right here, burning all of a sudden, there will be an unconscious reflex. I will move away from the fire. Any painful stimuli, I move away. So that's unconscious, happens very fast. What I don't want you to get in your head, ideas from here is that don't think all reflexes, it's always unconscious, involuntary, you have no control over it. That's not the case. You can control your reflexes. So we'll look at how in a little while. Basically, reflexes are there to maintain a homeostasis within your body, so deviation from any value, large or small, we want to maintain a balance. Homeostasis does that. So there are two general types of reflexes. We have the somatic reflex and autonomic reflex. This chapter, we only talk about somatic reflex. When we go to chapter 14, we'll look at autonomic reflexes there. But somatic reflexes, this is mediated through the somatic motor nervous system and includes responses that either remove the body from a painful stimuli or keep the body from suddenly tipping over, falling. Usually that happens like when you're sleeping in your dreams, all of a sudden you're falling and you push yourself up. When you do that, that's a somatic reflex. Also other movements like that, anything got to do with movement of your body because of some kind of stimuli, something there, that's somatic. Autonomic reflexes, which we'll look at later, will be, like controlling blood